yesterday and even earlier about it. It's that stretch run because their numbers are so identical for most of the season. And their overalls are pretty close in a lot of the categories, too. But the fact that he's got the 3 more wins, and then they weren't just, like you said, it wasn't just one team in contention and the other. They were in the same teams. They were in the same race. So it's really not apples to oranges. It's apples to apples there because they were in the same run for the same playoff spot there. And you look at the difference. Look at just the month of September. Like you said, they also went head-to-head down the stretch, and Kluber came out with that one. But 5-1 in September with that practically 2 ERA. Hernandez's ERA was lower, but more strikeouts, less walks. Kluber, just again, if you're giving it to an overall body of work, then Corey Kluber will probably get the shaft today. But if you were looking at it, and I don't know about that when you say who uses advanced metrics, I don't know what the makeup is of the people that vote. I'm curious age-wise how that breaks up, because clearly that's going to probably define a little bit about who looks more at what, because obviously older writers are going to look at things in the, that's cute, but here's the way I look at it, whereas the younger guys are going to go, ERA is great, but I look at, NR2 times 3 plus 13 divided by 2. And you're like, okay, whatever that means, man. I just watch how they pitch. But anyways, it'll be interesting to see what that decision is. And the Indians are having some fun. I just saw something on Twitter. They're asking people to film themselves doing play-by-play of an inning of Corey Kluber's strikeouts and then send it to them. They've got a whole link set up through Major League Baseball's website or whatever, so they're having some fun. Saw an interesting tweet here, quoting it from Twitter here, a nominator here on Twitter, said Indians get a lot of flack for losing the guys, but 3 Cy Young winners discovered by this team in 8 years. Think about that, man. That's some pretty good. They've done a good job of turning up some pitching, even if they can't afford to keep it.
Yeah, that's true, and even if they're not responsible for drafting it and developing it necessarily.
Right.
But CC Sabathia being the only one that they really did do that acquired Cliff Lee and acquired Corey Kluber. But, you've got to have the eye for the talent, and Cliff Lee was far from a finished product when they acquired him, and so I guess you got to give them some credit for developing him, just as you do with Kluber.
Hey, that's why I want them to make trades, Dan, this offseason, because that's where they beat the rest of that's where they beat the rest of the league right there. My brother is at the trading, and I'm telling you, they can't necessarily identify their own prospects, but they can sure as hell identify somebody else's and make a good move, as we've seen with trades like Corey Kluber. So I hope they're quite active as the meetings are getting ready to go, and I hope they are quite active here. I think they will be too. I think before Thanksgiving, we've got the first pieces beginning to fall into place for what the Indians are going to do upcoming this offseason. We'll have a lot of time to talk about that. But anyways, I just wanted to mention that with you here today. I know you figure he deserves it too, but I don't know, what does your gut say, man? Are they gonna lean that way, or do you think the pedigree's gonna do it?
I gotta believe that these voters at some point at least this year have actually seen Corey Kluber pitch. I think that and have talked to maybe players around the league, because if you ask people that have faced him, and of course he was particularly tough on the Royals this year, just laid waste to the Kansas City Royals almost every time out against him. And they ask the Royals, the World Series team, who the best pitcher in the American League was this year. I think that might wrap it up for him. But
absolutely.
I've got to believe that they'll look at the Cy Young Award is for one season, not for a career, and I think if they look at 2014, that Corey Kluber's got a good chance to win it. I'm probably saying that with my heart, but I'm also saying it with my head, because I looked at it and evaluated it, and frankly, I'm kind of scratching my head as to why Felix Hernandez is even close in this consideration, because he finished with 15 wins and did not really help his team a whole lot down the stretch.
Right, and I think that's as big a part of it as any. We'll see, man. We'll see what they do, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Much less excitement for the announcement of the MVP ballot. I'll just be happy to see Whitley be representative on there in a decent place. Get a good pile of votes.
I hope Brantley's in the top 3. I think that's realistic.
I was saying 4 or 5.
If he comes in third, he comes in third in the voting, maybe even fourth. I think he'll be. I think he'll get a lot of votes, and because he just had an incredible season, and if you look down, if you factor in defense and everything else, I think you just got to consider him certainly one of the top 3 or 4 most valuable players in the American League.
Yeah, you went a little higher than me. I said I'd be happy if he's in the top 4 or 5, all of that stuff. And put yourself to the voting of, like I said, I just represent and the freshmen getting a few Heisman votes, letting them know, hey, I'm coming back next year. And next year I'm going to be at the final table, So prime the pump for Michael Brantley and his MVP season coming up next year. We'll get it started here, but it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm telling you, I think the Indians got some things cooking, man. We'll see. We'll talk about that. A lot of time to talk about that. Let's talk about the Buckeyes, and of course, you and I talked about the victory, the statement victory, and a lot of people, not just us, but the playoff committee called it a statement win there for them as well, too. Let me get your thoughts as the new polls came out last night. I said at the beginning of the show that at least now you get some kind of an explanation. You may not like it. You may want to argue with it or debate it or whatever, but at least now they put it out there, and then they'll stand in front of you. It's not a mythical board, and it's not just released rankings with computer polls, and this is just the way it is. Now the chairman will sit out there and say, here's why we picked what we did. Here's why we moved these teams around. We saw them bump FSU a little bit there. I mean, they're not afraid to do what they want to do, but at least they'll explain it, which gives you a little bit of transparency and a little bit of understanding instead of just here's the rankings and we're not going to tell you why we did it.
Yeah, that's true, and I think they've done a nice job of that. Jeff Long, the committee chairman, every week since they started this thing has come out. He's answered questions. He's explained some of the rationale. This week he's talking about, putting this team over that team because they've got more wins against ranked teams, and this team has 3 wins against ranked teams. This team has 2, So he's doing that to explain it. But as far as the Buckeyes go, so the number 8, I really have to kind of like where they are because every week since they started this thing, at least one of the top 4 teams has lost. So all we need to have happen is for that to just continue here and for the next few weeks. And I think the Buckeyes may be sitting in good shape, obviously, assuming that they can win out. Some people have speculated that TCU and this game against Minnesota is important this week for the Buckeyes because they also played TCU, and TCU beat them 30-7. So that 30-7, that 23-point margin is something that Urban Meyer maybe has on his mind this week. He'll probably deny that he does, but that he wants to put a bigger beating on Minnesota than TCU did because I've also read it speculated, and it makes some sense that that 4th spot in the final 4 teams might be a decision by the committee which team is more impressive, the winner of the Big Ten championship game or the winner of the Big 12 championship game. That might come down to Ohio State or TCU. So again, makes this Minnesota game the only common opponent those 2 teams have as being something the committee might look at, even though it was fairly early in the season. So that's one issue, and then of course Baylor may be involved in that as well. One of the more interesting aspects of this thing, question marks about it, is everyone is, regardless of the outcome of, say, Alabama-Auburn or Mississippi State-Mississippi, Alabama-Mississippi State, all 3 of those games still have to be played. All 3 involving, Alabama and Mississippi State, obviously top 4 teams, or top 5 teams right now. That the assumption is that the SEC West team is going to win the SEC championship game, where that's obviously not at all a guarantee, and Missouri or even Georgia could come up and knock them off, and that would really throw everything into chaos because it would. Let's assume that Mississippi State loses at least one game, let's say 1, between now and the end of their season, and playing Alabama and Mississippi, they obviously have a good chance of losing one. That they would go into that game and they would lose, and that would give every SEC team 2 losses. Again, we're assuming there that Alabama might trip and stumble in one of their 2 tough games that they have remaining. It's very possible, and we spoke about it for weeks on end now, that the committee might be faced with an SEC West with no team with fewer than 2 losses, and and clearly the best division in college football. Do they get shut out of the Final Four because there is no even one-loss team in that group? So it's really going to be interesting down the stretch. But like you say, it's good that at least every week the committee comes out and faces the public and explains their rationale and explains why they do what they do.
Right, because I can deal with it. If it's controversial, that's one thing, but at least you're explaining it and you're saying this is why. And plus, if you notice, that's done a good job of muting perhaps the level of controversy too, because people would normally just go blah, 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 and then they go, well, I kind of understand what he's saying here, and let's see how the next few weeks play out in this. But I think that was needed because there was so much question about where the transparency would be and how these, because it's so subjective where you're going to place some of these teams. So it's a good thing there. Plus, I think for the next month and even more for going forward into the future, you now are getting an idea for how this thing's going to work for the future seasons, for how you schedule, for everything, because now you're, okay, wow, all right, it doesn't just matter about whatever that computer says that our schedule's worth. We've got to actually impress actual people, and they're looking for this, and last year they moved this team down because they did this, and I think you're going to see teams now be able to hone in on this on what, now you know what they're looking for, basically. So now you can hone in on what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of years in terms of scheduling at least, and those kinds of things can't change overnight. Those schedules are set sometimes 5, 6, 7 years in advance, but at least schools have had a couple of years of notice coming into this season to maybe fill in an open date on their schedule with somebody a little bit more challenging than they otherwise might have in anticipation of this. But it's going to take a few years for actual scheduling to reflect the changes. But you're right, just in terms of how the committee thinks, what they value, what they diminish in value, and pay little attention to, and what they focus on. Yeah, you're right. We're going to learn some lessons about that. And I think we've already learned some. They value a head-to-head win over say some other factor like strength of schedule or conference affiliation, and they've said as much when they explain things. And of course, beating ranked teams. One of the problems with the Buckeyes, even though they're facing technically a ranked team this week in Minnesota, there's a little bit of a national yawn going on over that, especially when you consider that you've got Mississippi State playing Alabama up at the top of the rankings. And of course, there's a good chance that the Buckeyes will have another ranked team to face in the championship game if they get there, since both Wisconsin and Nebraska are ranked in the top 20 right now. So either one of those two teams, one of those two is going to win the West, and the Buckeyes would be facing them in the Big Ten championship game. So at least two more ranked teams the Buckeyes will have to face between now and the time those selections are made.
Yeah, I thought that was fortuitous for the Buckeyes, too, that Minnesota ended up number 25 there this week. I said, well, even though it's right on the outskirts, it's another top-ranked team that's got a number next to their name, so it may not add a whole lot to it, but it's at least something to add to the resume, and then you'll have your title game winner there, too. And I agree with you, too, about the margin of victory here, too, because the way they're looking at things, when you've got a common opponent, if one team wins by 20 and the other team wins by 40, then, you may be more impressed by the way they blew out the common opponent. So that's something to keep in mind, too, for the score. But you got to be careful there,
I was going to say, I don't think that the Buckeyes are – I would be happy, certainly, if the Buckeyes won by, 3 touchdowns Saturday.
Oh, yeah. You can't go into that.
It's a little bit – yeah. It's a little bit tough to predict because I don't know if you've been watching what's going on weather-wise in Minnesota, but their advertising, I saw one of the guys, one of the beat writers on Twitter this morning talking about an ad that he saw for shovelers for the field.
For the game,
that they're trying to hire people to basically wield the snow shovels to clear off the stadium.
And
so look out for some serious weather. And they crushed Iowa. That was really Iowa's favorite in that game, and Minnesota hung 50 points on them. So they're full of themselves. Now Minnesota's schedule is very backloaded. Their final 3 games show why they're 7-2 right now. I mean, they face Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Nebraska in their last 3 games of the season. Yep. So they could very well end up 7-5, and the bloom will be off that rose real quick. But they're a team that runs the ball well. They're a little bit one-dimensional. They've got a real good running back in Cobb, and they